Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Be seated. All right, your next witness.
Your Honor, we'd like to call Laura Amber Heard to the stand.
All right.
Amber Laura.
I do.
All right, thank you. All right.
Thank you, Your Honor. Will you please state your name
Yes, it's Amber Laura Heard.
and what is your address?
I live in Yucca Valley, California.
And how old are you, Amber?
I am 36. I just celebrated.
Okay. And do you have a daughter?
I do. She also celebrated her birthday recently. She's 1.
Okay. And what is your profession?
I am an actor, mostly.
Okay. Now, why are you here?
I am here because my ex-husband is suing me for an op-ed I wrote.
And how do you feel about that?
I struggle to have the words. I struggle to find the words to describe how painful this is. This is horrible for me to sit here for weeks and relive everything. Hear people that I knew, some well, some not. My ex-husband, with whom I shared a life, speak about our lives in the way that they have. This is the most painful and difficult thing I've ever gone through, for sure.
Now, there was a trial in the UK in July of 2020 where Mr. Depp had sued the Sun newspaper and Dan Wooten. Do you recall that?
Yes.
And what was your level of participation in that lawsuit, in that trial?
Well, I was not party to that lawsuit. I was a witness, I suppose the primary witness, since it dealt with the truth of the relationship that I shared with Johnny.
And what, if any, role did you have to play with respect to, for example, witness statements and testifying?
Objection, compound.
I said, for example.
Overruled.
I had to write, I think I gave 7 witness statements under oath testimony. I sat on the stand for 4 days under mostly cross-examination. And up until this point, it was the hardest thing I had ever had to do.
Thank you, Amber. I'm going to take you back, and if you can just tell the jury a little bit about your background. Tell us where you grew up.
I come from Austin, Texas, a small town outside of Austin that you probably haven't heard of. No one has. It's called Maynard. And I was raised by my mother and my father, and I grew up with a little sister, although I have a big sister as well.
And your little sister's name is?
Her name is Whit Heard.
And how much of an age difference is there between the two of you?
Whitney and I are about 1 year, I think we're 16 months apart, so right next to each other.
And what did your father do for a living?
My father broke horses and did construction, he painted houses, and hunted and fished, but that was for fun.
And what did your mom do?
She worked for the state of Texas.
Let me just, since you talked about the breaking horses, can you just tell the jury what your role is in assisting your dad on that and what is involved in breaking horses?
Objection, leading.
Can you just tell me about?
Overruled. Go ahead.
You just got to stay on, basically. I would help him. I was more of a crash test dummy. You know, when you train a horse, it's a wild animal. It doesn't necessarily like to be ridden. And there are people out there who are crazy enough, like my dad, to pick that as a profession, I guess. And he was really good with horses, and I was the son he never had, so it was my job to, stay on.
And what, if anything, did you learn from your father about how to react to the horses?
Well, with training horses, I guess the key things are to not show fear, not get intimidated, not show fear, be tough and calm.
Tell the jury a little bit about your educational background during those growing up years and your work experience.
I worked any job that I could from the time I was really young. I wanted to get out of Texas and do something with my life and see things and do things. So I was in school and really pushed myself to, I just always pushed myself to be able to accelerate the process. I wanted to, get out of school as fast as I could, and I wanted to do more things with my life than stay in Texas.
So what types of things, so where did you go to school when you were younger?
I was a scholarship kid at a Catholic school growing up, several different Catholic schools, but they were always in the other, on the other side of town, in the wealthier part of town. And I grew up quite working class, and thankfully with, as long as I maintained an A average, I enjoyed the benefit of a scholarship, and I did that until I realized that I could take my GED and SATs early, and I did that and placed out of school and effectively left school at 16 years old, I believe.
And what did you do for work during those younger years?
I took any job that I could. I worked at my father's construction company, sometimes, just administrative stuff. I mean, it was a small company. But I answered phones, and I worked at a modeling agency that was also, offered photography classes, makeup classes, hair and makeup classes for people that were pursuing a career in entertainment. And I started taking classes that I paid for by working there, effectively as a trade. And I eventually worked there long enough to be able to pay for my headshots, which are the pictures that you use in the industry to promote yourself, in whatever, acting, modeling, or both.
Okay. And what, if any, charitable work did you do when you were still young?
It started off as a requirement for the school I went to, and then I liked it so much, I think, because it meant I wasn't at home, and it was important to me is just to not spend time at home. And I really loved meeting people, so I worked at the soup kitchen every morning before school, during the school year, for about 4 years. I didn't go on weekends, but on weekends I would do various things. Worked at children's museums, typically, because they would work with younger volunteers, and mostly soup kitchens and things involving children. I worked at with deaf kids for a while, and I love it.
And when you worked with deaf kids, what, if anything, did you do to learn to be able to work with them?
Objection leading and 404. And relevance, Your Honor.
Overruled.
Well, I taught myself how to sign basic sign language, and then I I pursued it. I audited a course at the community college, which I ended up going to get out of high school early later on. But I would audit classes. The teachers never wanted to kick the random 12-year-old out of their class, I suppose. So I remarkably was able to audit, I think, the majority of 2 semesters, and that's also helped me learn.
So how did you end up in Los Angeles?
I did a small job in Texas where I played a part in a movie, and the actor in the movie that I was playing opposite had an agent visiting him from LA, and I met her on set, and she said that she had heard about me from another bit part I did. I was taking jobs in Austin for really anything, to be an extra, to apply I did makeup once. Nothing, no job was too small or, for me. So I put myself out there, and she had heard about me, and she said, I have heard about you in this town, and I'd love to meet you in LA if you're ever out in LA. And I was like, when can I come? And she made an appointment with me for the following week, and I used all but $180 or something to get out there, and I landed. I didn't know anyone. I was 17, and I've effectively been there ever since, I suppose.
So when you arrived in Hollywood, please tell the jury what you did to get moving there, get going.
I went to every audition, every casting, every meeting, every appointment that I could. I put myself out there. I didn't have a car because those were expensive. So I took the bus around LA. It was before smartphones. I had a Thomas guide in my bag and a change of tank tops. Not that it mattered, but I went to about 10 auditions sometimes a day, and would change clothes if I needed to in the back of the bus I was taking, and I just hustled from one audition to the other. And I got a bit part on one thing, and then I got a bit part on another thing, and then eventually my roles kind of became more important or bigger, and it's been a slow progression, I guess, since then, of doing either tiny bit parts in bigger movies or doing, larger roles in movies that no one would see. And I guess, it still is kind of like that.
So I'm going to ask you to go from 2002 to 2009. If you could just describe for the jury a little bit what types of parts you had. I think they've indicated you have not been well known here in this courtroom compared to Mr. Depp. So perhaps just take them through a little bit of that.
Yeah, that's fair. I did small roles in big films like Zombieland and Pineapple Express and movies that were well known. My first one was Friday Night Lights. But again, I had small roles in those bigger films. And then I would do larger roles in kind of smaller films. Like I did a project where I was the lead in a John Carpenter film, and he came out of retirement to do that. And that's kind of how it was in terms of my career for those that first initial 10 years or so. It was just going from slightly bigger role to slightly bigger role, and just working my butt off.
So I'm going to take you up to 2008. Did there come a time that you auditioned for the Rum Diary?
Yes, I auditioned for that in about 2008, I believe.
Please describe for the jury your experience in auditioning for the Rum Diary.
Well, I auditioned a few times, which is common in my work. You get a call back, as they say. And I think I had at least one, maybe two callbacks with the director. And then I got a call saying that Johnny, who at the time was, I think I knew that he was producing it as well, was doing a project that was something very personal to him. He was reprising his role as his late friend, Hunter S. Thompson, and it was a very important project to him, and that he wanted to meet me in person. I thought I would be going for maybe an audition, but it was just a meeting. I went to his office and met with him for a few hours.
And what did you talk about during those few hours?
We talked about books and music, poetry. We liked a lot of the same stuff, obscure writers and, interesting books and pieces of poetry that I haven't heard anybody else reference or know or like. And he was very well read and charismatic, and I think I left the office with a few books that he gave me, and we spent the whole time just talking about things that we care about. And I was so surprised that somebody, I knew who he was. I wasn't familiar, I wasn't a fan of his work. I wasn't familiar with him, but I knew who he was. He's one of the most famous people in the world. So it was already a weird thing to go and get called into his office. And, I'm a no-name actor. I was 22, I think. And I thought it was unusual. It was weird because he was twice my age, and he's this world-famous actor. And here we are getting along about obscure books and weird, old blues. And I thought it was remarkable. I thought it was unusual and remarkable. I left there just feeling like, wow.
So did there come a time that you learned that you were going to be cast for the role in the Rum Diary?
Yes, a few days later, my agent said that Johnny's going to call you. We gave him your phone number. I was like, oh, okay. And shortly after, my phone rings, I pick it up, and I hear, this like deep voice on the other line, and he said, "You got you're it, kid. You're the dream. Hunter wrote this part, and you're the dream. You're it, kid." I was like, amazed.
Please describe for the jury what that means. What was the Rum Diary and this Hunter Thompson? What was the concept here, and what role were you playing?
Well, it was my understanding that he was bringing to life his late friend. And what he told me was that this character is supposed to be the dream woman, like the dream, American dream. And so I knew what he meant. He indicated to me when he told me I got the role that I was that, that I was the dream kid. That's what he said.
So did there come a time that you started filming the Rum Diary?
Yes, I'm not quite sure how much. I think we started filming in maybe March of 2009.
And where did you film the Rum Diary?
We shot it in Puerto Rico.
And describe, if you can, the events of the filming and your interactions with Mr. Depp during that time.
It was a bit surreal, filming in a place like Puerto Rico. It was beautiful. It takes place in the 50s, so everything really looked beautiful, cars and clothing, the music. It was a very colorful shoot in general. I couldn't have asked for, a better scenario. I was on film. I was on set, reading my books, and occasionally Johnny would talk to me, and then he started to be really kind to me, like more open with me. When we'd have hot days filming, there'd be this big SUV pull up, and a security guard would kind of usher me into this car, and it would have the AC blasting, and I'd be sitting in the back of the SUV just thinking what a strange experience the whole thing was. And we didn't really have a whole lot of interaction on set until we did a scene that involved kissing. We had a kissing scene, and it didn't feel like a normal. It didn't feel like a normal scene anymore. It felt more real. There are certain things that you do in the job to be professional, like when you have to do that sort of scene, and you don't you don't use your tongue if you can avoid it. There's certain things that you do to just maintain a certain line, and it just felt like those lines were blurred. I mean, he grabbed my face and pulled me into him and really kissed me. But we were filming a scene.
Did he use his tongue?
Yes.
Okay. Did you celebrate your birthday while you were in Puerto Rico?
I did. I celebrated, I think, maybe my 23rd birthday there.
And what, if anything, did Mr. Depp do for your birthday?
Well, we were already kind of talking about books and poetry and things like that. He gave me a few really beautiful poetry books. And he gave me a bicycle, like a vintage bicycle, because at the time I was riding around on a bike, and I had a lot of time off since I was a smaller role in the movie. And yeah, I think that was it.
Okay. Now, did there come a time that you ended up visiting him in his trailer?
Yes, I think there was we would hang out after or in between scenes or in between setups. We often were, talking about things and would continue the conversation into the trailer, often with the director. Bruce Robinson was his name. And then at one point we talk about wine. It's another thing that Johnny and I shared in common, a love for wine, red wine. And we were talking about a kind of wine that I enjoyed, and I was, going on about how great this bargain wine was, and I didn't understand, how much more sophisticated Johnny's taste in wine was. So I was going on about the virtues of Malbec or something, and I brought him a bottle of this wine, and I set it down. And at some point, I'm going back to get back to set, and he kind of kicked his foot up in the air and basically kind of lifted the back of my bathrobe up. And
Can I just stop you there? Why were you wearing a bathrobe?
because I was doing a scene, it was a period film, so it took place in the 50s. And so I had all of this old undergarments that are for that time era on. And the scene involved me changing. So I had all the costume on. And he kind of picked up the back of my robe with his boot. And I kind of turned around and laughed, giggled, I didn't know what to make of it at the time. And I just kind of giggled and batted it away playfully. And he kind of playfully kind of pushed me down on this bed sofa that was in his trailer, just playful and flirtatious. And he said, yum. And he kind of lifted up his eyebrows like that. And I just giggled, laughed it off, kind of batted him away, and, moved on, went back to set.
And were you in a relationship at that time?
I was.
Okay. And was Mr. Depp in a relationship at that time?
That was my understanding, yeah.
Okay. And did anything else of significant happen during that time period while you were filming with Mr. Depp, other than what you've told us?
We just had this, it was a friendship, a flirtatious thing. I felt chemistry. I felt this other thing that went beyond the pale of my job, for sure. Johnny clearly felt that way about me, had indicated to me that that's how he felt in many different ways. But at the same time, we were both in relationships, and it is a job, and, it was intimidating, and I just remember feeling kind of intimidated and a little nervous about that. And I also was in a relationship, so we went our separate ways, and I didn't hear from him for a long time.
And that's, so approximately how long were you filming in Puerto Rico for the Rum Diary?
A few months is my best
All right,
guess.
and when you left Puerto Rico in the filming, when is the next time that you had any contact from Mr. Depp? And contact could include anything, communications, written communications, as well as telephone or otherwise.
We had no contact until Johnny called me on the phone one day, and I was driving, and he invited me over to his home in California, in Beverly Hills, and it was out of the blue. I didn't even have his phone number, so it was quite unexpected. He called me a second time, but I don't think we actually connected, or we didn't stay on the phone because we didn't really speak. But the first time was the only time I actually spoke to him, and he invited me over to his house under kind of he said that, we could get Bruce, who was the director, to come over, something about the movie, but it was clearly not about the movie, if you know what I mean. It was, so I said, I said, my friends are in town, and I'm busy with that, and kind of hung up, feeling really startled, that didn't know what else to do.
What, if any, gifts did Mr. Depp send you during that time period after you filmed the Rum Diary?
He sent me several gifts. He sent me a beautiful dress, one that I wore in the movie, with a beautiful handwritten note, said happy wrapping, and made a reference to the dress being wrapping paper. He sent me a few gorgeous, expensive, what I can only assume are expensive, collectible books, items. And then when I was away filming on a different job, he he did send me some guitars. I know one delivery, I was informed about one delivery, and my partner at the time intercepted the attempt to deliver and called me immediately and said, what should I do? And I said, send it back. And she did. And she indicated that there was another one that had already previously attempted delivery, and it was also rejected. I sent it back because I wasn't there, and I wouldn't have accepted it anyway.
Okay. Did there come a time that you ended up having to go on a press tour for the Rum Diary?
I got a call for the Rum Diary press tour in the fall of 2011.
So that's close to two and a half years after you filmed?
I'm an actress, not a mathematician for a reason. Roughly, yes.
Okay. And could you please describe for the jury what a press tour is? Just explain it to them.
Well, you take a movie once it's completed, and if it doesn't have distribution, as part of the promotion of that movie, you go to these various places, normally cities like London or New York, and you do press events in those cities to kind of promote the film, and you go to place talking about the film.
And so you were then called to participate in the press tour for the Rum Diary?
Yes, I had just finished going through the process of separation with my former partner, and I was moving and going through that, and I got a phone call saying, remember that movie you did in Puerto Rico? Well, they want you for the press tour. And I said, well, perfect timing. And we did that, I think late October 2011.
Okay. So describe for the jury your interactions with Mr. Depp during the press tour.
Well, on the the beginning of the tour was Los Angeles, where we both lived, and we did a press day, normal press day, and then at the end of it, I was invited by Johnny to come up to his room to have a drink with him and the director of the film. And I went up to the room to see both him and Bruce, but as soon as I got there, Johnny said Bruce wasn't going to make it. So I stayed. Johnny and I started talking. He asked me about my relationship. I said, well, you know, I'm going through it. I'm going through the separation right now, and it's been, you know, rough couple of months, but that's normal. And he said, well, that's same with me. You know, it's been, I can't remember exactly how long he said it had been, but that he had split from the mother of his kids, and said that he understood.
All right, and then what happened next?
Then we drank red wine and continued to talk, and the talking became us, you know, reconnect. You know, it was like reconnection was almost instant. It was just chemistry. It's hard to explain that, but we sat on the couch and we talked, and you know, it felt like there was it felt like there was an electricity to the room. And it's how I felt when I was alone with him anyway. And it was instant again. I was like, whoa. So on the couch, we talked, finished some wine, and then I got up and left. And as I went to leave, he grabbed both sides of my face, similar to what he did in Puerto Rico when we were filming that scene. And he kissed me, and I kissed him back.
And what happened next with respect to any relationship with Mr. Depp?
Well, then we fell in love. We went on this press tour, and we went. It was a beautiful and strange time. You know, we were flying from one, not together, but you know, going from one city to the next, Europe, New York, Los Angeles, as I said, and we're just traveling around talking about this movie that we did together, that we participated in together, and we were falling in love. I mean, it was just, you know, at the first dinner in London, he sat me next to me. You know, he produced the film and was a part of controlling the film and was responsible for different things than I was as an actor having a small part in it. And we went on this press tour, and I think in London he had me sat next to him at a dinner, and then we ended up spending the night together in my hotel room. And for the rest of the press tour, it was on. I'll put it that way.
All right. And how long approximately did the press tour go?
I don't know exactly how long it lasted. I think, you know, there were press engagements in this city for a few days, and then another city for a few days, and then there was a break, and then there was another press opportunity, I believe. So it was kind of spread out over maybe a month, if I'm guessing.
So when you returned to Los Angeles, what, if anything, took place with any relationship with Mr. Depp?
Well, once we were back from the press tour, you know, we had this, you know, whirlwind romance kind of just in these like beautiful places all over, and we're falling in love and not able to really show it because the world didn't know about the split between he and his former partner. And of course, as a woman, I was like, is that troubling? You know, and I'd ask him, no, you know, he swore to me that they hadn't even shared a bed for a year, and that they were protecting the kids and not publicizing it. So, or not making it known to the press. And so we kind of had to be a little bit under the radar, not a little bit, we had to be really under the radar, because as Johnny pointed out, that the world would blame me and call me a homewrecker, even though I had nothing to do with it. So we were secretly dating, and then, you know, it was beautiful. felt like this man knew me and saw me in a way that no one else had. I felt he understood me. I felt he understood where I came from. I felt that, like, when I was around Johnny, I felt like the most beautiful person in the whole world. You know, it made me feel seen, it made me feel like $1 million. And that kind of feeling where, you know, he's just lavish gifts and lavish expressions of love, and how he had never met a woman like me. I mean, I remember he took the foil off of this bottle and put it on my ring finger, and I had only been with him like days, you know, or maybe it was weeks at the time. Yeah, it was probably about a few weeks, but it just felt very intense. But we weren't doing normal life stuff. We weren't like stuck in traffic with each other. We weren't going to the grocery store and doing life. We were like hiding in these places around the world. He has so many homes. And so we'd be in one of those homes, or my home at the time, and it would be like a bubble, like we were in this little bubble of secrecy, and it felt like a warm glow, as we would say. Just music and the kind of books that we both loved, and poetry that we both knew by heart, and it felt like a dream. It felt like absolute magic.
So while you're dating, I take it you're dating at this point, right?
Yeah, sorry,
While you're falling in love, you're also dating, right? Okay.
Yes.
Did there come a time early on that you ended up going to his Bahamas island?
Yes. So shortly after, you know, we, I think, started dating October of 2011, and you know, as I mentioned, this bubble, you know, where he'd come over to my house and not leave for like 3 or 4 days, you know, just smoking cigarettes and playing music and reading poetry to me or painting me, or, you know, just talking. And then he would disappear. And there'd be just no way to get a hold of him, no way to contact him. At first, I didn't really think anything about it, but he disappeared at one point, and then came back and said he was dealing with some health issue, and would I join him in the Bahamas? And I think that's when I learned he had an island, and I was on a trip with a friend of mine in Spain, and it was for the holidays, and I kind of rerouted my trip so I could come and land in LA landing in Miami instead of LA, so I could go and meet him on the island. And he had Keenan come and meet me on that trip, like in Miami. I get off one plane, get onto another, and go and join him on his private island. And I noticed he was drinking Beck's and tea, but like lots of tea. And I didn't foolishly think anything of it. I just, you know, thought the man really, seriously, I missed it before, but really, really loves tea. And we had this beautiful, I don't know, less than a week probably, trip in the Bahamas, a private island, beautiful sandy beaches. It's a scene that you just don't, I had never experienced anything like that. It was a beautiful place, a beautiful time, and I fell head over heels in love with this man.
So after the Bahamas, I assume you came back, and are we talking now early 2012?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. So what were you doing work-wise while you were dating him in this early stage?
What I always do, I would be taking job to job to job, going from one movie to the next, mostly not filming in LA. So weirdly, you live in LA to go shoot on location in other places. So when I was in town, we would go back to this bubble, like insular bubble with beautiful, blaringly loud music and no one else and nothing else. And then, I'd go off to work. And so would he. Well, eventually, yeah, he left to shoot Lone Ranger, I believe.
Okay. Now, we've heard a little bit about Lone Ranger, and that's about mid-2012, is that right, when he was shooting that?
That sounds right, mid-2012, yeah.
And were you shooting anything at that time?
I was shooting...
Machete Kills?
I believe I was shooting Machete Kills in Austin. I had a small part in a Robert Rodriguez film that shot in Austin. But I think Johnny was shooting and then having some time off, and there was just a lot of travel, a lot of movement. So,
and so, what if any visiting did you do with Johnny while he was on his set for Lone Ranger, and where was he?
well, he was filming all over the Southwest, and at some point I came to visit him and on one of his locations, and I would stay in the house because I couldn't really, occasionally I would leave with his security guards, but I didn't really have anything to do but visit him for a few days. So I'd cook and kind of stay at home and paint or whatever and wait for him to come home and have dinner ready. And we would have these little bubbles, but kind of scattered throughout the Southwest as he was filming. And at the time, Johnny had, when I first arrived at one of these locations, it was the first time that Johnny told me that he had had a health issue, something with his liver, and that he wasn't, that's why he was not drinking. He was drinking a lot of tea, like a lot of tea.
Okay. And so we've heard a little testimony about boots. What, if anything, did you do to help Johnny with his boots?
Well, I mean, I suppose that I took off his boots, and it made an impression on him, and I was happy to, anything I can do to show love. Certainly how I felt about him. But if he wanted to take off his own boots, he certainly could.
Did you buy Mr. Depp any knives during that time period?
Objection leading.
Sustained.
What if anything did you do with respect to knives during the time period you were with him in the Lone Ranger?
Objection leading.
What if anything?
Overruled.
Johnny had a thing for turquoise, and that eventually, being in the Southwest, it can happen really quickly. I also too really love turquoise, and he has he loved knives. He loves a lot of things. When Johnny loves things, he does it a lot, and lots of it. So he had these daggers that he had given me that they were beautiful in design, and they're long curved daggers, and he just talked a lot about knives, had a knife and gun collection, and was quite proud of it. And at some point, I don't really remember exactly when it was, but at some point I picked up what I thought was a really beautiful turquoise handled knife, and I had it engraved with a saying that Johnny would say to me all the time, which I thought was romantic, as funny as that is to say now.
And what was the expression, the saying?
Until death, hasta la muerte in Spanish.
Now, by the time that you're visiting Mr. Depp during his shooting of Lone Ranger in the June through August 2012 timeframe, what, if any, relationship has he developed with your family?
Oh, well, starting really early on, Johnny was so kind, so generous to my family, but especially my mom and dad. He met my dad, and my dad's a big personality. He's a rowdy guy, and Johnny just all of a sudden, I had never noticed, Johnny have a southern, all of a sudden Johnny had this southern accent and was really like buddies with him, and they really seemed to get along very well. There, just like instantly he was giving my dad gifts. He gave him guns. He gave him knives. They had this, Johnny just really just showered my dad. And my dad's a working man, salt of the earth guy. And he was just like, floored. He's getting all these amazing gifts and being invited to come onto these locations. And, Johnny's this big movie star. And my dad was just like, I think my dad would have married him himself, not if I hadn't. And he just instantly, he gave my mom jewelry, brought her out to come and see me while I was visiting Johnny on Lone Ranger in some part of the Southwest. I think it was Colorado. He gave her this beautiful turquoise necklace, and they were definitely taken by him.
And what, if any, relationship had Mr. Depp forged with Whitney by this time, your sister?
I believe the relationship came a little bit later as they got to know each other, but he did the same thing with my sister and just really found a bond with them that, was he tried to do anything and everything he could to make them feel like special, and they did. My mom, my dad, and my sister.
And what, if any, relationships did Mr. Depp form with your friends?
Well, Johnny's so generous and can be this really, like, overly generous almost, like showering you with gifts and compliments and just, and he has access and means to really, we're not talking about giving you a card. We're like talking about just these like extravagant trips or these extravagant gestures, and it's a lot. And he did that with my close friends. I relied heavily on my friends and had a pretty strong support network with them, and he really just showered them with generosity and love and light, and invited them to come to these exotic places and flew people here and there. He's incredibly generous.
So going back to the filming of The Lone Ranger, what, if anything, did Mr. Depp do with respect to a horse?
Objection leading.
What, if anything?
Overruled.
Johnny at one point insisted on buying me a horse, and I, of course, said that's extravagant. There's no way I could accept that. That's how will I take care of that horse? It's so extravagant. So I said no, of course. Eventually, he got a hold of my dad and worked it out with my dad, like what kind of horse to buy, and then showed me a picture of this horse and said, "It's yours. It's coming here." I think it was being transported, and he said, that he had my dad's help on it, picking out. And I grew up on my dad's horses. I grew up riding with my dad, so I went. I had resisted for I think about like a month and a half or something of him kind of bringing up the idea and me saying, "That's a crazy gift. No, thank you. No, that's incredibly generous, but I couldn't accept." To all of a sudden, I had a cult.
So let's take you through 2012 and your relationship. Could you just describe for the jury a little bit about how that relationship evolved through 2012?
It was always intense. It didn't become intense. It almost started that way. When I was with him, I felt that electricity in my body. I felt like butterflies. I couldn't see straight practically. It was just, I was head over heels in love. And he felt like that to me. He felt like he was also in love. I didn't feel like he was faking it. I felt like what we had, it felt like to me at the time, there wasn't any love like that, you know? I mean, and then he started to kind of do this thing again where he'd disappear and he'd come back. And I remember at first when he first started drinking, I didn't really think much of it, but all of a sudden the behavior kind of started to go in line with the disappearing, and he'd come back and he'd just be different. And I'd say something and he'd accuse me of saying something else or saying it in a different way, or he would, it was mostly my clothing at the time and me working. That was the main thing. Like, I found myself trying to not talk about auditions because it would change the mood so dramatically. I tried to, you know, he would make these comments about, you know, whoring myself out, but do so in the context of me acting, you know, and he would talk about other actresses who do my role in this way where they were worthless whores, that they were, you know, fame hungry, you know, expletive, you know, just this. The point is, it felt really dirty to be an actor. Never mind that he was one. It was dirty that I wanted to do this job that I wanted to do, and I was doing the job of an actress. It was everything every time I was walking out of the house, he would ask me, "That's really what you're wearing, kid? Oh, I see." You know, I wore a dress to an event once, and I felt beautiful in it. Like, stupid as that sounds, I felt pretty in this dress I picked out, and I showed it him because you know, it's a carpet, it's red carpet, so it's like, you know, publicized, and I kind of thought it was weird he wasn't saying anything about it. You know, I left him to go do this red carpet, and I was like, "Did you see the you know, the event I went to?" You know, basically, I felt pretty, and I thought, like, "Did you see that?" You know, I wanted him to say something about that, I guess. And he said, well, this is after he stopped talking to me for some time, didn't tell me why. When he came back in my life, he wouldn't explain why he was acting different. He just kind of acted mad at me and didn't know what I had done wrong. And when I brought up the dress and the event, because it was an event to support a charity I was really involved with at the time, and I said, you know, "Did you see that thing?" And he said, yeah, I think the whole world saw that, kid. That's how they'll remember you. That's how the world will remember you. And I was like, oh, come on. I mean, it's like, but it, you know, I felt good in it. I felt good. And he said, yeah, kid, that's what you're putting out there in the world. No one will ever forget that. And that's all they'll see you as. That's what you wanted. That's what you were going for. You know, my dress was low cut. I get it. It's low cut. But I felt, you know, I felt really embarrassed and horrible that I wore that. I felt like, how could I have made that choice? Of course, you know, he's right. You know, you start to believe it. I started to believe that made a lot of sense, of course. But it didn't stop with that. It was clothing in general. And when I walked out of the house, it wasn't just like, hey, you're not allowed to wear that. It was like, oh, really? That's what you're wearing. No wonder you get cast in those roles. No wonder you that's what you are. That's what you're making it. And it you know, it continued. And then there would be a blow up. And at first it was just to throw something, smash some things. It loves to smash up a place, an apartment, furniture is what it started with. Glass. Threw glass at me, and I remember it was summer. And he just threw this glass across the kitchen, and it didn't hit me, but it shattered behind me, and I remember thinking that it like very easily could have hit me. And that, calling me a whore, it didn't start with using the whore word, it was just comments. until it would escalate. And then I started to notice the pattern of escalation where he'd throw glass or turn over a table. Then he would hit the wall, and then he'd hit the wall really close to my head. You know, like when I'm standing there, you know, just hit the wall, screaming at me. But then he would disappear and get clean and sober, and he'd come back and tell me that he was done drinking, he was over it, he was done, cleaned himself up, he had done it before, and he'd do it again. And then he would go back to this, like, wonderful, like, almost like just unreal, like, but real, you know, but unbelievably nice, sensitive, kind, warm, generous, interesting, funny man that I loved. And he would make me feel so loved, like I would feel so distant from that thing that was so scary that I would not even recognize it too. And that was how, you know, our relationship kind of started to develop in that first year.
Do you remember the first time that he physically hit you?
Yes.
Please tell the jury about it.
It was it's seemingly so stupid, so insignificant. I will never forget it. It changed my life. I was sitting on the couch, and we were talking. We were having a normal conversation, you know, just, there was no fighting, no argument, nothing. And he was drinking, and I didn't realize at the time, but I think he was using cocaine because it was like there was a jar of cocaine out on the table. I realize that sounds weird, but it was like an actual vintage jar of it. But I didn't see him use it at the time, so I didn't really factor that in. I just, you know, he's drinking and we're talking, and there's music playing, and he's smoking cigarettes, and we're sitting next to each other on the couch. And I asked him about the tattoo he has on his arm. And to me, it just looked like black marks. I didn't know what it said. It just looked like muddled, faded tattoo that was hard to read. And I said, what does it say? And he said it says wino. It says wino. And I didn't see that. I thought he was joking because it didn't look like it said that at all. And I laughed. It was that simple. I just laughed because I thought he was joking. And slapped me across the face. And I laughed. I laughed because I didn't know what else to do. I thought, this must be a joke. This must be a joke. Because I didn't know what was going on. I just stared at him, kind of laughing still, thinking that he was going to start laughing too to tell me it was a joke. But he didn't. He said, "You think it's so funny? You think it's funny, bitch. You think you're a funny bitch." And he slapped me again. Like, it was clear it wasn't a joke anymore. And I stopped laughing, but I didn't know what else to do. You know, I didn't know what to do. You would think you would have a response, but I, as a woman, had never been hit like that. I'm an adult, and I'm sitting next to the man I love, and he slapped me for no reason, it seemed like, and I missed the point. It was that stupid. Second slap, I know he's not kidding, but I don't know what else to say or do, so I just stared at him. I didn't say anything. I didn't react. I didn't move or freak out or defend myself or say, "What are you doing? You're crazy." I just stared at him because I didn't know what else to do. And he slaps me one more time. Hard. I lose my balance. At this point, we're sitting next to each other on the edge of the couch, or I was on the edge of the couch. And I'm all of a sudden realizing that the worst thing has just happened to me that could possibly happen to you, I realized that I wish so much he had said he was joking. Because it didn't hurt. It didn't physically hurt me. I was just sitting there on this carpet, looking at the dirty carpet, wondering how I wound up on this carpet and why I never noticed that the carpet was so filthy before, and I just didn't know what else to do. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know how to react. I just sat there thinking, how much time do I have till I figure out what I need to do? Because, God, did he just hit me? No, I didn't want to leave him. I didn't want this to be the reality. I didn't want to have the man I was in love with. I know you don't come back from that. You know, I'm not dumb. I know you can't hit a woman. You can't hit a man. You can't hit anyone. You can't just hit somebody because I knew it was wrong, and I knew that I had to leave him. And that's what broke my heart, because I didn't want to leave him. I thought if I got up out of that room, I would leave the best thing that ever happened to me. And I wish I could sit here and say I stood up and I walked out of that house and I drew a line and I stood up for myself. But I was just looking at the dirty carpet, trying to will myself to get up, to walk out of the door, because I knew I needed to. And I really slowly, I stood up, and I remember looking at him in the eye and just looking at him, frankly, because I didn't know what else to do. And before I know it, he starts crying. And, you know, like, I had never seen an adult man cry. I didn't even really see my dad cry at my grandma's funeral. You know, it's weird. And he's crying. Tears, just falling out of his eyes. He gets down on his knees and he grabs my hands and he's touching my hands and he's saying to me, I will never do that again. I'm so sorry, baby. I put the fucker away. I thought I killed it and it's done. I thought I put the monster away and I've done it before. It's done. But on his knees. And I didn't have words. I didn't know what to say. I just remember thinking that it was just, he was crying. He seemed so sorry, but I knew I couldn't just forgive him because right? That means it will happen again, no? You know, like I've seen the health class videos, like everyone else. And I got up in my car. I walked to the car. I didn't say anything. I made a point to not say, oh, it's okay, or anything like that. I just didn't say anything. I got up, I went to the car, I sat in my car, and I felt like I sat there forever. I didn't want to turn the key. I just leaned my head up against the window, and I remember just seeing my breath on the windshield, you know, on the glass of the window of the door, just seeing my breath and trying to will myself to have the strength to know what I should do in this moment, because I was heartbroken. And I sat there for a long time, and I eventually turned the key and drove home.
And what did you do after that?
I don't know. I don't remember what I did when I got home. I don't remember. I went to my therapist. I told her.
Objection, hearsay.
I'll sustain it as to what she may have told her.
I went home, and a few days later, started getting, I actually don't know how many days later, but I started getting calls and texts from Johnny, you know, apologizing profusely. I mean, just, you know, he said, I'd rather cut my hand off than ever lay it on you or lay it upon you, you know, and he had that way of talking. It felt like poetry. And he showed up to talk, like with the understanding that, you know, he understood I could never forgive him and it was done. So I felt kind of safe in saying, okay, let's have a talk, or, you know, yeah, we'll talk. I think I know I just wanted to see him, and he comes over, brings me gifts. He brought me a couple cases, actually, of that Vega Sicilia wine that we've heard about, which is a really nice, expensive wine that I could never, at that time, dream of affording, you know. And we talk, and he tells me that he had put this thing away, that I could trust him, that it would never happen again. Of course, it would never happen again. That he had put this thing away. He had killed the fucker, is what he said to me over and over again. I put that fucker away. I killed that monster. I'll kill it again. It's done. I'll never lay a hand on you again. And I wanted to believe him, so I chose to.
Chose to stay in the relationship?
Yeah, I did. I believed it, but, you know, I believed it wouldn't. I believed that there was a line he wouldn't cross again, and that was it.
And so you stayed, correct? You stayed in the relationship?
Yes.
Okay. So, is this a good time?
You can keep going a little longer, please.
Okay.
Thank you.
So could you please describe for the jury the evolution of your relationship after that time with Johnny?
I don't know how long it was until things got bad again. He did start drinking again. I remember it was almost, you know, he'd start drinking again, the disappearing thing, the coming back. He'd come back like in the middle of the night to my house. And it would be unclear to me, you know, drunk, often really drunk, and kind of accusing me, but not directly. Nothing was very direct. It was a lot of accusations, but they were veiled. You know, what I was wearing, who I was with, why didn't I text him back? I didn't text him back right away. This is when I was at my place in Orange. Sometimes he would show up to catch me. Like that was a pretext for coming over. And by the time we were done talking, I would have thought I had convinced him that I loved him, that I only loved him, there was no one else, and then that we were back in an upswing and would go back to good, loving, like sick, romantic love, like kind, sweet, velvety love. And then it would be something I said, why did you say it that way? You know, if I had to leave for an audition, I could guarantee that couldn't guarantee, but 2 of those in a row, and when I came back, he was angry at me, you know, and I wouldn't necessarily know why. And then he started accusing me of things, probably, like, at first it was indirect, and then it became really direct. Then the punching of the walls next to my head, which is a constant at that time in 2012 when he was drinking. Eventually that became, you know, him accusing me of cheating. I'd defend myself. I'd say, you know, that's crazy. You're wrong. I would never. The normal things. And it would escalate to the point where he would push me or shove me down, and then I'd get back up. And this happened several times. That's why it's not more specific, I suppose. When I'd get back up, I'd look him in the eye. I made a point of getting up and looking him in the eye. It's my way of defending myself at that time. And I'd look at him, and he'd ask me if I wanted to go again. and shoved me back down. Eventually, he just hit me. Remember, he hit me in the face when I denied having an affair with my ex-wife, my ex-partner at the time. And he said he had proof. I denied it. And I was walking out of the bedroom, slapped me across the face. I turned to look at him. And I said, Johnny, you hit me. You just hit me.
I'm going to ask you, Michelle, can you bring up 1783, please?
What number again, please?
I'm sorry.
What number?
Defendants 1783.
1783, thank you.
Do you recognize this picture?
Yes, I do.
And could you tell us what it is?
It's a picture of my face with a note that Johnny left for me by the coffee. Typically is where we'd leave notes like that.
And does this accurately depict the scene portrayed?
It was one of those scenes. As embarrassing as it sounds now, I don't know which scene this came from. There was a lot. It escalated quickly, fast, and it became.
Amber, let me ask it a different way.
Thank you.
Is this a picture of you? Is it an accurate picture of you?
Yes.
Your Honor, I'm going to move the admission of 1783.
Your Honor, we have an objection. May we
Okay,
approach?
sure.
Will you please describe for the jury some of the cycles you had with Mr. Depp through 2012?
So, in 2012, the violence was pretty, relative to what it became, pretty, slapping, backhanding. Well, it went from this eggshell kind of, you're walking on eggshells, nothing you're doing is kind of right, but you don't know what you're doing wrong. And then I was doing something wrong clearly, but it was unclear within the scope of an argument what I was defending myself against. So it would shift from a rumor he had heard that I was with a friend, or I had been photographed standing too close to a male person. That was a person I had had something with, and I was lying to him about, and it would be eggshells, accusations, and then he would explode. It started with throwing things, destroying the property, and screaming at me. I remember the screaming at me was the worst, because I kind of always felt like I had done, I had to defend myself. I had to tell him so he didn't think these things were true. And sometimes, he would shift accusations while I'm trying to dispel one accusation. He'd start another one, and nothing I could do to calm him down. It seemed like I'd walk away, and that would make it worse. I remember in my apartment in Orange, he would grab me by the hair, or he'd grab me by the arm, pull me into him, scream at me that way. He'd smash things around me. Then he would smash things very close to me. And then he would just hit me. And it started with slapping, and it got to be like repetitive slaps where he'd hold me in a position and slapped me multiple times in a row, then it would be, you know, eventually I later would either push him off of me or I'd try to hit his hands away from me. I tried to, not in 2012 so much. At that time, I was mostly, my defense was, I'd go some other place. Like, I don't know how to describe that. It was, I'd focus on something else. I'd stand up, look at him, try to stand up to him that way. Later, I adopted other kind of strategies to deal with it. But at the time, in 2012, it was, he'd have this blowout and then he would leave, disappear, and I'd be committed to not talking to him. I'm done with this relationship. I can't take it anymore. I said that so many times. And then he'd come back, clean and sober, telling me either he had a chip, he didn't have any chips, but he would say, I've gone to meetings, I have a sober companion now, I'm doing this program, I'm reading this, I'm doing this, and he was done with drugs and alcohol for good this time. And he'd come back in my life, and with the combination of him being sober and having gone through this horrible thing where I felt like my heart ripped out of my chest, you know, like a relationship ending is hard, I think, for anyone, but ending under that circumstance is really painful. And so when he'd come back, it would almost feel like a solution to that, and it would feel great, and we would be good again, and he'd be extra nice and extra apologetic and extra loving, and it would just, and we'd be back in the good bubble, the warm glow. And eventually I'd get bored, and then I'd see him drinking again. When I started to get upset, noticing the pattern of the violence going with the drinking and drugs, then he started sneaking it. So it became less clear, and I'd have to look for clues as to what he was on. So I just knew how to react, you know. Johnny on speed is very different from Johnny on opiates. Johnny on opiates very different from Adderall and cocaine Johnny, which is very different from Quaaludes Johnny. But I had to get good at paying attention to the different versions of him. 2012, I was in the beginning stages of this, just learning these patterns. I was just learning that drinking kind of correlated with the violence.
And did you confide in anyone about these issues you were having? I think she can
Objection,
say
hearsay?
I think she can say if she told anybody.
As long as she doesn't say what she said.
Right, right. So did you tell anyone?
Yes, I did.
Who did you tell?
I told my therapist. I eventually told my mom.
And let's go ahead and take a look at Defendants Exhibit 150. 150.
Your Honor, I'm going to object on hearsay. Yeah.
Why did you decide to confide in your mother about the issues you were having with Mr. Depp?
I think I felt safe talking to my mom because I knew that she understood these dynamics and she wouldn't judge me for staying with him, for loving him, even though this was happening and was happening to me. I knew she would understand.
And when approximately did you start confiding in your mom about your issues with Mr. Depp and the physical abuse?
Objection, hearsay, compound.
I sustain as to compound.
When did you start confiding in your mother about the abuse you were suffering at the hands of Mr. Depp?
I was confiding in her from the very beginning about the abuse, the psychological abuse, the kind of control, the disappearing, the not knowing where he was, then he'd come back and sometimes in the middle of the night, the constant accusations, like that sort of thing. I talked to her about probably from the very beginning. The fact that I was secret, I had to hide. I couldn't tell any of my friends that I was with him for a long time because he told me everyone would blame me for the split with him and his partner. So I had to kind of sneak around and kind of get brought to his house, typically in a secretive way, and then he'd come to mine in a secretive way, and it was just all very, so very isolating. And I confided with her at the very beginning on that sort of thing, and then later opened up to her about some of the violence. I did it gently. First I just wanted to have someone to talk to about how scary it was. The rage and the uncontrolled violence, the rage that this man had, and why it was
Objection,
pointed
Your
at
Honor,
me.
hearsay. May we approach, please?
Okay.